Another source of stress and strain in a relationship can be ostracism, being snubbed, being excluded, isolated, ignored, maybe even being banished. And although for most of us, I think the first image that comes to mind is somebody being ostracized that you don't like, it can also occur within a relationship that is not ending as well. And let's be clear here. We're not talking about unintentionally ignoring somebody. When ostracism occurs, it is intentional. This is not one of those situations when you say to your boyfriend or your girlfriend, "You ignored me all night at the party," and then they apologize and say it was completely unintentional. Ostracism is purposeful, and it's also pretty common. The common term for this is to give somebody the cold shoulder. So you get their text but don't respond, or their call, or their email, or instant message, or whatever you people do these days that I don't understand. They may even try to speak to you directly in person, and you actually ignore them face to face. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes ostracism is thought to be a good choice. For example, there we go, had to get my slide moving. Some people will say that they need to cool down and get their head on straight before talking to somebody so that they don't blow up on them. So they don't say something that they're pretty sure they'll regret in the future. So they take some time, even if it's just a few hours. And then when they do communicate with the person, they may say, "Why didn't you respond to me?" And they'll say, "Because I needed to cool down before I spoke to you." So they're admitting that they ignored you on purpose, but they feel like it's for a good reason. And note, at least they feel like it's a good reason. Other times, ostracism is used because a person wants to avoid confrontation. Maybe you are generally a very non-confrontational person to begin with, and you do whatever you can to always avoid confrontation, even with small things that wouldn't bug other people. Maybe you want to avoid this particular person or this particular issue. And let's be honest, ostracism is often used to punish the other person, to purposely try to hurt them. When you ignore somebody with no explanation, what it does is it puts you in a position of control because you know what's going on, but they don't. And it's up to you to end the ostracism, not them. So you're in the driver's seat. It can be hurtful, humiliating. When somebody ignores you, it sends a distinct message, even if it's a temporary message, that you're not worth their time, which makes you feel bad. And I kind of chuckled when the author noted that time passes more slowly when we're being ignored, because it's true. It's aggravating because it's occurring, and it's aggravating because we have no control over ending it. And it causes us stress, simple as that. So what do we usually do about it? How do most people usually handle a situation in which they're being ignored? Well, you got two choices. You can either put up with it and try to fix the situation if the relationship is valuable to you, or just move on to another. If a person feels they've been unjustly treated this way, they may get really ticked off and really angry. Because remember that part of being ostracized is not just being ignored, it's having no control over it. That's the other person's decision. You can't make somebody pay attention to you or talk to you. There is a very real loss of control here on some level, which accounts for the surge and intensity of feeling for those who are romantically ostracized who end up becoming violent. They feel like they have a total loss of control and they want to regain that control. So being ostracized can be hurtful. Sure, it can. But it can also make you feel frustrated or really angry or all of the above. The text refers to research about ostracism and something as simple as not being included in a game of catch with the ball, both in person and online, and how being included in the beginning and then excluded hurts. It also refers with just one sentence to a study involving the KKK, which is actually called, this is the title of the study, "The KKK Won't Let Me Play. Ostracism Even by a Despised Outgroup Hurts." And in this study, what they did was they examined whether ostracism by a particular type of outgroup, meaning a despised group, was sufficient to inflict emotional distress. And it was, even with the KKK. So what the study did was they used cyberball, an online ball toss game, and ostracized participants reported lower levels of belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence, and more negative mood than people who were included. Okay. But then it was no different when participants experienced ostracism by a despised outgroup, um, like the KKK, somebody who's a member of the KKK. So ostracism sucks. There's no other way to put it. It can result in varying levels of hurt, frustration, aggravation, humiliation, emotional upset, and it can result in somebody capitulating to you and giving in, or somebody getting really angry with you, giving you the proverbial finger and walking away. People with lower self-esteem are more likely to experience this more, and they're more likely to put up with it. That would be an experience, sorry, a good area of research to study, isn't it? Do people with lower self-esteem do something completely subconsciously in the way they act, or what they do or do not say to indicate to others that they're more likely to put up with it? While somebody with higher self-esteem communicates in some way that they would not. But again, ostracism is something that can cause stress and strain in a relationship, understandably, and a feeling of relational devaluation. As we continue, so notice I'm trying to keep you organized with numbering what we've already talked about up top. As we continue, jealousy is yet another avenue that stress and strain may be the result of in a relationship. And we're going to talk quite a bit about jealousy. Keep in mind, there's different kinds of jealousy. Sometimes it occurs for a valid reason. Sometimes it occurs for no reason at all and is a result of somebody's misunderstanding of their incorrect perceptions. Jealousy can be a really complicated emotion. It can cause anger, frustration, a feeling of a lack of control, being hurt and sad, and all of these occurring in one moment. The three emotions that occur most often, however, whether the jealous person realizes it or not, are hurt, anger, and fear. What does feeling hurt have to do with being jealous? Well, obviously, when you feel somebody might not value you as highly as you value them, so that they might be with somebody else in some way, that hurts. When you think about how they might actually leave you for somebody else, that will cause you to fear that possibility. What is the jealousy going to lead to? And have anxiety and anger about it. Keep in mind, when we talk about anger in relation to jealousy, that doesn't necessarily mean extreme, serious anger where somebody will be violent. But yes, you will likely experience anger at the process of being looked over for somebody else. Although, as indicated in the text, in the US, 13% of all murders involve the murder of a spouse, and jealousy is the most common motive. If you've ever watched Forensic Files or any similar show, you know what I mean. It is always, always the spouse who did it. At the same time, some people truly, honestly would be insulted if their person did not get at least a little jealous over them. They would take it as a sign that their partner didn't care enough about them. So let's say they're in a bar one night and somebody offered to buy them a drink or tried to pick them up, and their partner saw this and just shrugged their shoulders. That would bother them. But there's a distinction to be made here between what I would call unfounded jealousy and understandable jealousy. Those are not the actual terms. Those are just my own little spin on them. Reactive jealousy occurs when there is a real threat to a relationship. For example, when one of the partners realizes that the other has in fact been unfaithful. This kind of jealousy is always in response to a realistic danger. They are reacting to somebody. It's reactive jealousy. It might be because of something that occurred previously or something that is feared to occur in the future but it's a real threat. They're not imagining things. Suspicious jealousy is different. It's not due to a real threat. It is so there's no indication that your partner has engaged in any behavior that would threaten the future of your relationship with them, and they haven't done anything. So, for example, you're at a bar and you notice that an attractive stranger across the way is smiling at your partner. If you perceive that as a threat to your relationship and get angry at your partner for flirting with the stranger, that is suspicious jealousy. This is what we see on TV and in the movies when this kind of jealousy causes a guy to start a fight with some stranger flirting with his partner. When somebody is suspiciously jealous, they get really snoopy with their partner. Check their texts, check their email, their phone log. They always ask them who they were talking with. And keep in mind, this isn't reactive jealousy where there's a real threat. This is suspicious jealousy. It's completely unfounded. There is no real threat. Is it normal to feel jealous in a relationship? I can't answer that because there's so many mitigating circumstances. If somebody's partner's been unfaithful in some way, and yes, that includes other than sexual contact, we'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, it's natural to feel jealous if your partner's been unfaithful. That's reactive jealousy. You are jealous in reaction to a real threat. But if you stay together, how long would that jealousy continue to be unfounded? 3 months, 6 months, a year. At what point is the jealousy that is justified or reactive jealousy? At what point does it evolve into suspicious jealousy or is no longer founded? When partner A is unfaithful in some way to partner B and they decide to stay together, as expected, partner B will get a lot of reactive jealousy because they were unfaithful. So I'm getting my letters mixed up. You know what I mean. If a year down the road, they're still checking texts and keeping track of how they spend their day, is that still justified? Can they just not get over it? And if that is the case, should they stay together? I don't know. I'm not Dr. Phil. I can't answer that question. Surprisingly, there are no significant differences between men and women in regards to one being more jealous than the other. Although, as I say that, I'm not really sure which one I was expecting to be more jealous. So, in terms of amount of jealousy overall, there's no differences. But there are differences in other ways. I've already talked about how attachment styles can directly affect how likely a person is to have their feelings hurt in a relationship. And I said that people with a tendency towards anxious attachment will have higher levels of anxiety, that these people tend to experience hurt feelings more. These people are also more likely to experience jealousy and to experience it in a more intense manner. They're more likely to be worried about their relationship ending, to feel inadequate in it, all of which will increase feelings of jealousy. If a person feels, wrongly or rightly, that they don't have any good alternatives for a relationship, they'll be more likely to experience jealousy as well. But at the same time, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because the most secure person in the world with a really high level of self-esteem may still experience periods where they wonder if their partner is fulfilled in their relationship. Remember in a previous lecture, I talked about mate value, and this means that people tend to stick with partners that they are about equal in regarding levels of attractiveness to themselves. So your mate value is the assessment of overall attractiveness and as a reproductive partner. And if there's a mismatch in a relationship and you feel that your partner's mate value is higher than yours, you may be more insecure and thus more prone to jealousy because you feel like they could do better than you if they wanted to. So it's a feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop. When are they going to realize that they could be with someone who's better looking than me, or smarter than me, or more athletic than me, or whatever it is? Whether or not jealousy occurs will also be affected by a person's individual characteristics. Do they tend to be a neurotic person? Somebody who tends to get fixated or obsessed with something? Somebody who tends to be over anxious a lot, they're more likely to be jealous. Of course, a person who tends to be naturally more trusting will be less likely to be jealous. You'll be more likely to be jealous if the potential other person is a friend or a former partner of your current partner, or somebody who has a higher mate value than us. Because all of these people are perceived to be more serious competition by us. Is there at least somewhat of an evolutionary explanation for why jealousy occurs? We've looked at evolutionary arguments before in relation to how people select a mate to begin with. So does evolution or evolutionary psychology explain, at least in part, jealousy as well? Well, we can presume that in the past it was in your own best interest to keep your mate and not let anybody else have them, which I know is overly simplistic, so that the possibility they might go and reproduce with somebody else would be pretty negative. We can also assume that those people who didn't lose mates to somebody else reproduced more, which gave them an evolutionary advantage. So, with that in mind, then, demonstrating jealousy and keeping your mate resulted in a reproductive advantage. And sticking with this focus on evolution, we've also discussed in a previous lecture paternity uncertainty, a man's need to have his own biological offspring and to be certain of that, which is another reason to exercise jealousy and suspicion of jealousy. For a man, a woman being unfaithful sexually would be a big problem. Who would be more concerned with that because it would directly threaten his lineage. But what about in regards to women? Is there some kind of evolutionary advantage that jealousy provided to women in the past? Well, in the past, women were much more dependent on men and their resources than they are now. So it really served them well to be suspicious to ensure their male partner was not going to take off and leave them high and dry with children to look after on their own. So from an evolutionary perspective, a suspicious woman was a well-supported woman. It wasn't so much a worry that a man would be sexual with another woman. It was that he might have a relationship with another woman, an emotional connection that might threaten him continuing to provide resources for her. Really not a very romantic way to look at it. But remember, this is from an evolutionary perspective, which means how our personalities and individual differences have evolved in part to provide us with some form of adaptive advantage in the context of survival and reproduction. The study referred to in your text by David Buss and his colleagues was titled Sex Differences in Jealousy, Evolution, Physiology, and Psychology. And what the study did was recognize that males risk uncertain paternity as well as investment in children that were not biologically their own in the event of sexual infidelity of their female mate, while women risked a reduced emotional commitment and a reduction in available resources in the event of emotional infidelity from their male mate. And this was actually 3 studies in one. So in this one study, they did 3 different things. In study 1, men and women selected which event would upset them more. A partner's sexual infidelity or their emotional infidelity, as outlined in the text. In study 2, they recorded the physiological responses while subjects imagined separately the 2 types of partner infidelity. So they monitored the person's like their heart rate, the contraction of their eyebrows, producing vertical wrinkles and frowning, and a skin response in which the skin temporarily becomes a better conductor of electricity when either external or internal stimuli occur that are physiologically arousing. Don't worry about remembering all that. And then in study 3, they tested the effect of being in a committed sexual relationship on the activation of jealousy. What we want to focus on is that all of these studies showed large sex differences confirming hypothesized sex linkages in jealousy activation. In other words, to put it very simply, men were more upset at the idea of sexual infidelity, while women were more upset at the idea of emotional infidelity. And other research backs this up. In a study called Men and Women Show Distinct Brain Activations During Imagery of Sexual and Emotional Infidelity, which is referenced a bit later in the text, it also demonstrated that men show different patterns of neural activity when they think about different situations that would cause them to be jealous. There are specific regions of the brain that control sex and aggression. And in the study, these were more active in men when they thought about sexual infidelity than when they thought about emotional infidelity. But for the female participants, there was no such difference. So does this kind of fit with our stereotype of men and women valuing different things, or of women being more emotional than men? Yes, it does. But is it accurate? I don't mean that the research was ill conducted, but that if it was presented, if you're given an either or scenario, well, you got to pick one or the other. It's the law of averages. If you only have two choices, which one upsets you more, emotional infidelity or sexual infidelity? Well, you got to pick one. And so you'll always have a higher number with one of them. And later research did demonstrate that both men and women find the idea of both kinds of infidelity to be distressing. If men do intend, though, to be more upset about sexual infidelity, and women do tend to be more upset about emotional infidelity, that does fit with what we already know about differences in perceptions of sex by men, excuse me, by men and women, doesn't it? So we've already discussed in a previous class that men overall tend to be more accepting of casual sex, and thus to have more casual sex than women. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in research. And if this is the case, then if a man has a sexual affair, maybe that's all it is. Casual sex that doesn't mean anything. His partner might not like it. It might make her angry and upset, but she may not view it as a real threat either if she's viewing it through that lens. But if a man develops an emotional connection with somebody other than his female partner, then it is the emotional infidelity that would cause his female partner more concern, even if he is also having sex with this person. On the flip side of this, since women don't have as much of a casual attitude towards sex, meaning when they're sexual with somebody, they're much more likely to do so because of an emotional connection instead of just being casual. When a woman has sex outside her relationship, that infidelity is considered more serious. A woman having sex outside a relationship is considered more serious than a man having sex outside a relationship, because when a woman does it, it's more likely to include the emotional element. In other words, sex and emotion are more closely connected for women than for men. So when men and women are asked what kind of infidelity would bother them most, it really does mean something different for each of them. And it's interesting, even though men are generally more okay with casual sex with no emotional connection, men are also quicker to assume that their partner is being unfaithful sexually. They'll focus more on potentially sexual messages from a third person more. They'll think about them more, and they'll be most concerned in asking their partner about what has occurred sexually first. So for all of these examples, women are more likely to focus on the emotional component. So I've just kind of brought this all together here because we have all these different facts and things being thrown at us. So I just put this in this little chart to kind of keep it straight in your head and in my head. So men are more concerned about, the paternity of their offspring. Women are more concerned about being supported in terms of evolution. Men are more concerned about sexual infidelity, women emotional. When it comes to casual sex, uh, men are more focused. So when it comes to casual sex, men are more accepting, women are less accepting. So then think about what each is more focused on. So your text refers to a TV show that is called Cheaters. I vaguely remember hearing of it before. I never watched it, but the premise of the show is that person A, the person who is the complainant, talks about the suspicions that their partner is cheating, and then the show investigates by following them, recording them, etc. And if infidelity is identified, then the suspect is confronted by the complainant and the host of the TV show together. And of course, then they show the person, the videos and the recordings and all that. When these confrontations occur, they are unplanned. The suspect is usually ambushed and they can become violent, which is why the show brings several security guards with them. In fact, the host was once stabbed, and you can find that on YouTube. Anyways, one research study looked at this show, and they watched 55 episodes and coded what occurred in the episodes. And they said that yes, female partners are more concerned about whether or not a male suspect had fallen in love with their affair, and male partners are more concerned with whether or not a female had been sexually active with a male affair. And the show is really wild. I would call it reality TV at its worst. As I said, you can find episodes on YouTube, but be warned, you start watching it, you'll get sucked in. And this is finally one of the areas where research exists regarding same-sex relationships. Because research indicates that when a woman has an affair with another woman, her male partner is not as concerned with focusing on sex as much. Why? Is this because the possibility of pregnancy is eliminated when two women are together sexually? Kind of bringing an evolutionary bent back into this discussion? We don't know. So we also know that if it is a couple that is gay, lesbian, or bisexual, they tend to be equally upset with sexual infidelity as they are with emotional infidelity. So what's the best way to deal with this then? What's the best way to deal with jealousy? Maybe the first question to ask is, what is a typical normal reaction? Is there a typical normal reaction? Well, as mentioned, to be hurt, to be angry, and to be fearful about what the result is going to be is already indicated are the most common emotions. But there's a lot of variation possible in those three main responses. What do you mean be angry? Be angry could mean yelling at somebody. It may refer to cursing them out. It may refer to being destructive in some way, breaking things. It may refer to acting out in an angry way that becomes violent. Or it may mean doing the same thing in return and being unfaithful yourself to get back at them. People may be very reactive at first, which is understandable. And then that might lead to being overly suspicious, which is also understandable. Or somebody may try to honestly and openly keep the relationship going to work things out. I think this is a situation none of us can predict with 100% accuracy how we would react. We may think we know, but until you actually go through something, you can't be 100% sure how you'll react. Now, this may not be very academic of me, but I actually laughed when I read the fictional scenario provided in the text, and then the reported responses from men and women to indicate sex differences in responses to jealousy. So the fictional scenario in the text is that you see your partner with their ex, and it's questionable. What I found funny was that according to the researchers, the women said they would pretend not to care and try to make themselves more attractive and take this as a sign they needed to work on the relationship. Well, they said the men said they'd probably get drunk, confront the ex, threaten them, and look at other women. Talk about reinforcing stereotypical differences in gender behavior. I think we could all agree, not that we do it, but I think we could all agree that the practical, well-balanced, mature way to handle jealousy, including thinking that you see your current partner interacting with their ex in an inappropriate manner, is to remember that their behavior and choices are not a reflection of us or our self-worth. Easier said than done, of course, because it's an emotional situation. Could be a really emotional situation. Maybe it's a natural reaction to sit there and pick over every little thing that has or has not occurred when you find out that your partner's been unfaithful, or when you think you have good reason to be jealous. It might be useless, but it does seem to be something that often occurs in these kinds of situations. And if you need help with that, don't be shy in seeking out that help, with whatever it is, whether talking to friends or family or a professional, even if there's been no infidelity and you're only dealing with jealousy. I mean, if therapy can help, it can help. So why wouldn't you make yourself open to opening up to a therapist? Because not being able to deal with jealousy does have the potential to destroy a relationship.